Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Welcome to Planet America. Hello, I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
This week, Kamala Harris drops out of the presidential race. We'll look at what went wrong.
I'm not a billionaire. It has become harder and harder to raise the money we need to compete.
We'll also sit down with the editor-in-chief of Wikileaks, that is, if the American government doesn't get to him first.
And in the history department, when the Rat Pack helped to swing an election.
And I'll take a deep dive into military spending.
Anytime you're ready, Pally.
You're enjoying yourself too much. But first...
No choice but to proceed with articles to impeach the president. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announcing earlier today she is pushing ahead with an historic rebuke of Donald Trump.
The facts are uncontested. The president abused his power for his own personal political benefit at the expense of our national security by withholding military aid and crucial Oval Office meeting in exchange for an announcement of an investigation into his political rival.
Earlier this week, the House Intelligence Committee released its Trump-Ukraine impeachment inquiry report, authored by the majority Democrats. It claimed to have uncovered a months-long effort by President Trump to use the powers of his office to solicit foreign interference on his behalf in the 2020 election. The committee then alleges that in response to their impeachment hearings, President Trump engaged in an unprecedented campaign of obstruction of their inquiry. That's the case for impeachment in a nutshell. The report restated a lot of known facts, witness testimony and previously expressed opinions. There were a couple of surprises though. House Democrats have obtained phone company records showing repeated contacts between President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and the White House at a time when Giuliani had embarked on a campaign to discredit the then US ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, and even more tantalisingly, calls made by the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, to both Giuliani and Giuliani's business associated Lev Parnas, who is currently under indictment for campaign finance violations. Parnas was believed to be an intermediary between Giuliani and Ukrainian officials as he sought to dig dirt on Trump's rivals. He now claims that Nunes, who, remember, is sitting on the committee investigating this whole affair, actually met with Ukrainians himself to try and get political dirt. Devin Nunes says he doesn't remember any calls and has denied any meeting.
So none of this is true. That's what I've said. My statement is it's demonstrably false. We'll get to all the facts when it's filed in court.
Articles of impeachment could include the findings of any other committees which may choose to report, potentially widening the scope of the impeachment from Ukraine to Russia, obstruction of justice or Trump's business dealings, despite Speaker Pelosi's desire to keep its narrow scope intact. The Judiciary Committee, meanwhile, began hearings of its own this week, with 4 constitutional law experts called to give their views on whether the evidence justified impeachment. 3 were called by Democrats. Unsurprisingly, they said yes, the president has committed impeachable offences. The one expert witness called by Republicans, though, said no. That was Georgetown professor Jonathan Turley, who claims to have voted against Trump, but says without first-hand witness testimony, the evidence of high crimes and misdemeanours just isn't there to impeach.
I believe this impeachment not only fails to satisfy the standard of past impeachments, but would create a dangerous precedent for future impeachments.
Talking about the president's defence, the House Intelligence Committee Republicans put out their impeachment report this week, where they wrote that senior Ukrainian government officials sought to influence the 2016 election, that some in the Ukrainian embassy worked with a Democratic operative, and that while Democrats dismiss these facts as conspiracy theories, they are indisputable. And they're right. The Ukrainian embassy was said to be coordinating an investigation with the Hillary team into Paul Manafort through a woman called Alexandra Chalupa. A Ukrainian government agency and politician did push documents that showed a dodgy $12 million payment to Paul Manafort. The Ukrainian ambassador did write an op-ed. Their former prime minister did write a Facebook post. And their minister for internal affairs did write a tweet that were all very anti-Trump. If you call that meddling in the election, then fair enough, make your case. Although we should note that lots of foreign officials were anti-Trump in 2016, and we should also note that a lot of that Ukrainian anti-Trump activity came after this, when Trump was asked whether he'd recognise Crimea as part of Russia, as in whether he'd recognise the Russian invasion of Ukraine as legitimate. Trump said, yes, we'd be looking at that. So it's not a huge surprise that Ukrainians weren't massive fans of Trump, but leaving their reasons aside, that Trump antipathy is what the Republicans in Congress are talking about. But that is not what Trump is talking about. What Trump said to Zelensky was, I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. So he's talking about something else entirely, some theory that Ukraine was involved in a Democrat hacking. That is the conspiracy theory that the Democrats are referring to, and Trump is pushing it despite the Senate Intelligence Committee Republicans apparently finding no evidence that Ukraine waged a top-down interference campaign akin to the Kremlin's efforts. And just to be clear, CrowdStrike isn't a Ukrainian company. The co-founder was born in Russia and has lived in America since he was a teenager. There wasn't one physical server. 140 servers and 180 computers were affected by the malware, and the FBI was given an exact replica of all of those hard drives at the time they were being affected. Looking at them after they've been either decommissioned or fixed is pointless. Oh, and if CrowdStrike really was being dodgy, then why is the Republican House campaign arm still using CrowdStrike to this day? Bottom line, Republicans right now are trying to conflate two completely different sets of Ukrainian allegations as if they're the same thing. One of them is a legitimate argument, and one of them is a weird conspiracy theory. They are not the same thing. So look out for that.
Which one they're going to go for. Now, another big name is out of the race for the Democratic presidential nomination. Senator Kamala Harris announcing this week that she doesn't have the money required to mount a primary campaign.
It is with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude, that I am suspending our campaign today. I'm not a billionaire. I can't fund my own campaign.
Kamala Harris follows other high-profile candidates out of the race like Beto O'Rourke and Kirsten Gillibrand. From day one, with a blockbuster kickoff speech in front of more than 20,000 supporters in Oakland, California, the Harris campaign carried the burden of great expectations.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
Well, to some, Kamala Harris was the next Barack Obama, and her poll numbers and fundraising were both strong through the first half of this year, gathering in a total of around $24 million. And then came this moment in the first debate in late June when Harris attacked Biden's opposition to the racial integration of schools by busing children to schools further away.
There was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
That moment saw Senator Harris surge into second place in the polls just behind Biden, but it proved to be something of a sugar rush, with as many voters apparently turned off by the attack as were impressed by it. A month later, in the second Democrat debate, Harris again had her sights on Biden.
You do nothing to hold the insurance companies to task for what they have been doing to American families.
But this time, Joe Biden was ready to counterpunch.
This idea is a bunch of malarkey, what we're talking about here. I don't know what math you do learning with California, but I tell you, that's a lot of money.
And then Kamala Harris herself came under attack.
Case of those who were on death row. Innocent people. You actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
My entire career, I have been personally opposed to the death penalty, and that has never changed. And I dare anybody who is in a position to make that decision, to face the people I have faced to say I will not seek the death penalty.
Yeah, and Harris's response directly after that debate really wasn't the best. It was defensive and downright snooty.
It's going to sound immodest, but I'm obviously a top-tier candidate, and so I did expect that I would be on the stage and take hits tonight because there are a lot of people that are trying to make the stage for the next debate, especially when people are at 0 or 1% or whatever she might be at.
That top-tier candidate remark followed Harris around for some time, but while that run-in with Gabbard sure didn't help Harris's campaign, I think its effect has been a little bit overstated. If we look at Harris's polling averages, you can see that her approval skyrocketed after that first debate, but then it rapidly fell back 5 points by the second debate when Gabbard attacked her. So what happened? Well, firstly, like John said, not everyone loved Harris's breakthrough moment in that first debate. In particular, some felt Harris selling "That Little Girl Was Me" t-shirts was a bit desperate. But more than that, look how that exchange ended.
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act.
See, Harris is clearly there chastising Biden about not supporting federally imposed mandatory busing. But a week later, she was saying she only saw busing as being in the toolbox of what's available and that any tool should be considered by a school district. In other words, after all the huffing and puffing in t-shirts, her policy was identical to Biden's. And the backflipping didn't end there. That whole month, she tried to convince people that her healthcare policy was the same as Bernie Sanders, but she wouldn't end private health insurance.
I support Medicare for all. It is my preferred
As a principle, you mean, not Bernie Sanders' bill?
I support the bill.
Okay.
I support the bill.
Because the bill gets rid of private insurance for everything that
it doesn't get rid of supplemental insurance.
Right, for cosmetic surgery, but for all...
So it doesn't get rid of all insurance.
Okay.
Now, that clip was from a few months earlier, but you get the idea. She was trying to be all things to all people, and she ended up nowhere.
Yeah, Harris certainly found it pretty hard to convince the left about her record on things like being a prosecutor and attorney general in California. And all along, she was trying to occupy the middle ground between the progressives, Sanders and Warren, and Joe Biden in the centre lane. But that did tend to make her policies look pretty fuzzy, as we saw. And her positions were seen as, shall we say, malleable. Well, Kamala Harris's poll numbers did slide down into the single digits in August, and the rise of Pete Buttigieg in the last couple of months saw Harris fall even further. With those sinking polls, the money started to dry up. Harris's fundraising went backwards in the third quarter, and while there are no figures for October and November, clearly it wasn't enough to get her into the final stretch in Iowa and New Hampshire. This week, Harris was overtaken in the poll averages by a man who has literally billions to burn, Michael Bloomberg. So, let's dust off the old game.
Guess who won't be president?
And there she goes, Chaz.
By the way, it was interesting how in a concession video there, she pointedly noted that she wasn't a billionaire, seeing as Harris received more donations from billionaires and their spouses than anyone else this year. Nevertheless, Harris's absence from the race is already being felt. Some have noted that the next debate may end up being all white. But really, it's no surprise. This is national support from black Democrat voters, according to Quinnipiac, with Biden miles ahead and Harris and Booker, the two black candidates, going nowhere. So it seems like no one's been supporting the black candidates.
But before we put the game away this week, news that Montana Governor Steve Bullock is going back to his day job, suspending his campaign for president as well. Steve Bullock was another one of these candidates who looked good on paper but didn't catch fire on the campaign trail. He made just one debate and then largely disappeared from view. And as for Kamala Harris, the VP buzz has started up already. The question's being asked.
Would you consider Senator Harris as a running mate?
Look, Senator Harris has the capacity to be anything she wants to do. I mean it sincerely. I talked to her yesterday. She is she's solid. She can be president someday herself. She can be vice president. She can go on to be a Supreme Court justice. She can be attorney general. I mean, she has enormous capability.
He's drawn up a short list of possible jobs for Carla. But what about those testy debate moments, Joe? Are there any hard feelings?
I'm not good at keeping hard feelings. Thanks.
John, what about Joe Sestak?
What about Joe Sestak?
Don't forget Joe Sestak.
I don't know who Joe Sestak is.
He's dropped out.
Of what?
See? The race, apparently.
He was running for president?
That's what the game says. Anyway, enough of Joe Sestak. Back to Biden. That grab you saw was filmed on Joe's new Iowa bus tour. The No Malarkey Tour, a name so catchy they had to put the dictionary definition of the word on the side of his bus. Although, to be fair, that name wasn't as bad as Ted Cruz's Courageous Cruiser bus in 2016 or Mitt Romney's Mittmobile, a Five Brothers bus. Oh, Mitt.
You know what? No Malarkey actually reminds me a bit of John McCain's Straight Talk Express bus in 2000. But the challenge for Joe Biden, really, Chaz, is avoiding moments like this when an Iowa farmer asked about Biden's son Hunter and the whole Ukraine thing.
Look, the reason I'm running is because I've been around a long time and I know more than most people know. And I can get things done. That's why I'm running. And you want to check my shape on, let's do push-ups together here, man. Let's run. Let's do whatever you want to do. Let's take the IQ test.
That was incredibly reminiscent of cranky Joe Biden from 1987.
And I'd be delighted to sit down and compare my IQ to yours if you'd like, Frank.
You have to toughen up, I think, John, because I don't think that's the last Hunter Biden question he's going to be getting.
Yeah. Let's have a look at the state of the Democratic primary race, though, this week. And Joe Biden's average lead has blown into double digits. He's actually fallen 2 points in the last fortnight, but others have fallen further. Sanders and Warren are both still losing ground. Bernie down 4, Warren down 5 since late November. Pete Buttigieg's recent rise may have stalled somewhat. He's solidly on a plateau in 4th place. The big mover, though, Michael Bloomberg, hitting the ground running with an average of 4 points already. We don't yet know where Kamala Harris's 3 or 4% national share is going to shift to. She spiked in July, of course, and at that point, when she did, she took backers from both Biden and Sanders, so maybe they'll benefit now. Then there's, of course, still that big group stuck between 1 and 3% down the bottom, and Governor Deval Patrick barely registering down the very bottom there, Chaz.
Yeah, you could see the effects, though, of Bloomberg's millions there at 4%. He's been spending big time. This is how much Tom Steyer spent last week, who's also trying to buy the nomination, and this is what Bloomberg spent. And this is what everyone else spent. In fact, Bloomberg has already spent about half of what Steyer has spent in his total campaign. And as for everyone else's total spending, Bloomberg is already dwarfing them after only 1 week. Another interesting aspect of the polls is how sticky Sanders and Biden's support is. Their ratings never seem to change. And this might be why. Around half of Biden and Sanders supporters have already made up their mind, whereas only about a quarter of Warren and Buttigieg supporters have made up their minds. Having said all that, nothing's certain. Remember, out of the last 10 Democratic contests in Iowa, the December polling leader won only 3 times. So strap yourself in.
Say, as long as we're all here together, why don't we have a drink? Oh.
In the late 1950s, the Rat Pack was just about the biggest thing in show business. Frank Sinatra was hailed as the greatest popular singer of his generation and an Oscar-winning actor to boot. Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. were both major stars in their own right, churning out movies, TV and records for the middle-aged cocktail set. They were bigger than Elvis.
Thank you very much.
Along with actor Peter Lawford and comic Joey Bishop, they caroused and kibitzed their way through a Las Vegas nightclub act that drew gamblers from across America. And after the show and a few drinks, they filmed cinematic romps like Ocean's 11. The Rat Pack had been named by actor Lauren Bacall, who told her husband Humphrey Bogart his drinking buddies looked like a pack of rats.
The only reason he's got a good tan, he found a bar with a skylight. What the hell are you talking about?
By 1960, Bogey was dead and Peter Lawford's brother-in-law, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, was running for president. It's not like Kennedy lacked charisma and Hollywood good looks, but you can never have too much of a good thing. Sinatra and Jack really hit it off, and old Blue Eyes did everything he could to help Kennedy win.
Vote for Kennedy, vote for Kennedy.
Sinatra turned their Las Vegas shows into campaign events.
Senator John Kennedy from the great state of Massachusetts. Yeah, Jack.
Not that Dino seemed that interested.
What was his last name again?
Behind the scenes, Sinatra brokered a meeting between Kennedy's father Joe and mob boss Sam Giancana to help get out the Union vote in places like Chicago. Sinatra, Kennedy and Giancana even had affairs with the same woman, Judy Campbell. The Rat Pack had a starring role at the 1960 Democrat convention.
Mr. Sammy Davis Jr.
Meanwhile, Sammy Davis Jr. had fallen in love with Swedish actress May Britt. A black man, no matter how famous, marrying a white woman was still illegal in 31 states. As Sammy's closest friend and best man, Sinatra begged the couple to put off the wedding until after Election Day, which they did. The Kennedys, though, dropped Sammy stone cold. He was off the campaign. May Britt's movie contract was torn up.
I know we're all indebted to a great friend, Frank Sinatra.
After Kennedy's narrow victory, Sinatra was put in charge of the lavish inauguration celebration. Every Democrat in Hollywood seemed to be there, including black singers Nat King Cole and Harry Belafonte, but not Sammy. He wasn't invited.
Picking up all those forget-me-nots, cause you make me feel so young.
It was a devastating blow for Davis, but Frank Sinatra would soon learn himself how ruthless the Kennedys could be when it came to politics and friendship. In the spring of 1962, President Kennedy was due to stay at Sinatra's luxurious compound in Palm Springs. Sinatra was excited. He had a guest wing built, complete with a helipad painted with the presidential seal. Then word came Kennedy would not be staying after all. Sinatra's connections to the mafia made him too hot to handle at a time when Attorney General Bobby Kennedy was waging a crusade against organised crime. Sam Giancana had also stayed at Sinatra's house. Instead, the president would stay at the nearby home of Sinatra's great crooning rival, Bing Crosby, a lifelong Republican. It stung. Sinatra refused to attend a party for the president at Bing's place. Marilyn Monroe did stay over, but that's another story. Sinatra smashed up the helipad with a sledgehammer and cut off all ties to Peter Lawford. 18 months later, both Monroe and Kennedy would be dead. As the 60s passed, the world was changing. The Beatles, the Stones, civil rights, the Summer of Love, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy would also be dead. By 1972, Sammy Davis Jr. had changed too.
I am a Democrat for President Nixon and his re-election.
I want to make this pledge to Sammy. I want to make it to everybody here, whether you happen to be black or white or young or old, and all of those who are listening. I believe in the American dream. Sammy Davis believes in it. We believe in it because we've seen it come true in our own lives.
Sinatra also broke with Democrats to support Nixon over the Liberal George McGovern. In 1980, another old Hollywood pal, Ronald Reagan, was running for president.
It's my considered opinion that the two gentlemen who flanked me would make quite a political ticket. Frank as president, Dean as his crawling mate.
By then, Sinatra's transition was complete. He donated $4 million to Reagan's campaign. He wasn't too happy when he was asked how could he support both the Kennedys and Reagan.
I have never had an allegiance with the Kennedys. I had an allegiance with President Jack Kennedy.
Well, that'll hold you for a little bit.
But they weren't letting Frankie off the hook that easily.
Mr. Sinatra, how comfortable are you with this sort of political activity?
I have been a registered Democrat most of my life. I look for better government each time we have a general election for the presidency and hope to pick a man who will be the winner.
And Reagan was a winner. Sinatra's reported mob ties occasionally still caused a few problems for Ron and Nancy. So did rumours Frank was having an affair with the First Lady.
Love a child.
It was, though, perhaps a fitting end. Frank, Dean, Sammy and Ronnie, working-class kids who lived through the Depression, supported the Democratic New Deal, conquered Hollywood and Washington, and now had all the money and fame in the world. And, like many before them and since, grew more conservative with age.
Well, while Congress are currently busy impeaching the president, they're supposed to be busy funding the government. They've only got 2 weeks. And one of the big sticking points of that process is the National Defence Authorization Act, or the NDAA. We're talking $750 billion for the military next year, but is that much money really required? Let's go deep. American Special Forces are currently deployed to 3/4 of the world's nations, with about 800 military bases in 80 countries, roughly twice the number of countries that had bases at the end of the Cold War. That doesn't come cheap, which is one reason why military spending adjusted for inflation is now the highest it's been since the 70s, apart from the height of the Iraq War. Now, it is true that when you see total defence-related spending as a share of GDP, it's not quite so dire. But when you graph it against
Health and Human Services, Education, Homeland Security, Energy, Housing, the State Department, Space, Justice, Transportation, Veterans, Labour, the Treasury, Agriculture, the Environment, Commerce, the Interior, Small Business, Science and Foreign Aid
combined, it does look pretty dire. Just ask Trump.
And we secured a record $700 billion for our military this year and $716 billion next year. No country is even close.
No, not that Trump. This Trump.
The U.S. spent $716 billion this year. Crazy.
And there's a reason that Trump disagrees with the other Trump about military spending. In 2018, the US spent more on defence than the next 7 countries combined. And that was when America was spending $100 billion less than they're about to. Strangely though, this spending bears no relation to the size of the military. Troop numbers are currently in the middle of a long-term decline. So does America really need to spend so much? The tales of Pentagon wastage are legendary, from the coffee mugs the Air Force bought for $1,200 each to the infamous $1 trillion F-35 fighter jet program, which during testing only saw 1 out of 6 planes able to take off. And I should say those planes can take off now. But just as there's always an example of wastage, there's also always someone saying the world's never been more dangerous. 2006.
Increasingly dangerous security challenges of the 21st
2010.
Complex and uncertain security landscape in which the pace of change.
2014.
Is growing more volatile, more unpredictable, and in some instances more threatening.
2018.
Security environment more complex and volatile than any we've experienced.
You get the picture. Although this time it might be different because 6 years ago, Congress imposed budget cuts to address the deficit, known as sequestration. And at least according to Jim Mattis, no enemy in the field has done more to harm the readiness of our military than sequestration. At the time Mattis was saying that, nearly 2/3 of the Navy's strike fighter planes were grounded for maintenance. Even now, the Defence Department has a backlog of $116 billion worth of maintenance and repairs waiting to be completed, with the Pentagon rating almost 1/3 of its infrastructure as either poor or failing. One defence whistleblower had some particularly troubling news.
When I took over our military, we didn't have ammunition.
But what is accurate is that the Congressional Budget Office has budgeted for the modernisation of America's nuclear weapons program, and they're estimating that program will cost $1.2 trillion over the next 30 years. So that adds more costs for the military. Also, let's not assume the rest of the world is standing still. Projections over the next 10 years suggest that China especially will be catching up with America's defence spending. Put China together with Russia and things might soon be starting to look a bit more even, especially in the realm of air power, where China has shown a particular interest. So there may be good reasons for a lot of US defence spending. The question is, how do you know if that funding is being used well? You see, back in 1990, Congress passed a law requiring that every federal department produce an auditable financial statement, and every department has done so, except for defence. To be fair, the Pentagon did conduct an internal study in 2016 that discovered $125 billion in administrative waste. But then they buried that study so it wouldn't endanger their funding levels. Finally, in 2017, the Trump administration did make the Pentagon undertake its first ever audit. and it promptly failed. Only 5 of the 21 Pentagon agencies audited received a passing grade, with 2 more receiving an okay grade. So this year, they tried again, and they failed again, with 1,300 new problems uncovered with the Pentagon's budgeting and record keeping. The problem is, the Pentagon performs all kinds of inscrutable and confusing bookkeeping operations, sometimes hundreds of times on the same dollar. So the Army, for instance, in 2015 took about $120 billion worth of funding, and somehow they made $2.8 trillion worth of wrongful adjustments to accounting entries in just 1 quarter. $6.5 trillion over the year. Where is the money going? Asked one analyst. Nobody knows. So make your own mind up about defence spending levels, because right now, assessing them is kind of a work in progress.
For some, Australian-born Wikileaks founder Julian Assange is a hero of transparency who has exposed gross abuses of power, especially those involving the US military. To others, though, he is a narcissist who conspired with Russia to help elect a dangerously unqualified American president. Either way, Assange and the whistleblower organisation he founded loomed large in the last decade. Icelandic journalist Kristján Hrafnsson is the editor-in-chief of Wikileaks. He stopped by in the Foval office this week for a chat, and we began by asking about Assange's health and his legal situation 8 months after being jailed for breaching bail and now facing indictment on US hacking and espionage charges.
His health has been in bad. I mean, after all these years locked inside the Ecuadorian embassy, of course. So he comes from a bad place into prison, from one prison to another. But of course, in Belmarsh prison, there is he's in isolation for most of the day, 22 hours a day, with little access to other inmates even. And they make sure that he has little access by emptying the corridors when he has to go from one place to another. So his health is deteriorating. He has lost weight. I've met him there on 4 occasions and visited him in the prison there, and I see a rapid deterioration in his health situation.
This case obviously is not about 2016. This is about the collateral murder files back in 2010. You were part of the same release.
Yep.
So is there any reason why America couldn't indict you as well?
Well, there's quite a possibility they could. And the reason why they haven't is probably they don't want to complicate the matter while taking me on, I had 20 years of journalism before in the mainstream media before joining WikiLeaks. They've been trying to portray this as a non-journalistic organization, which is absolutely wrong. And Julian Assange as somebody who has nothing to do with journalism. I mean, they call this espionage. They are indicting him on the basis of the Espionage Act, a 100-year-old relic from the First World War, which has never before been used against a journalist, which is the most serious aspect of this, because it has serious implication for all journalists all around the world.
Can we talk a bit about that distinction that is drawn? Some will maintain that WikiLeaks is an activist organisation, a whistleblower organisation that sometimes works with journalists and media organisations. Obviously, as editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, you represent the journalistic side of it. But is it fair to say that WikiLeaks, particularly if you look at the actions in 2016, it was an activist organisation? It took a political role that is above and beyond what the New York Times or the Guardian might have done.
I don't agree with that depiction because, I mean, in essence, what happened in 2016 was basically that WikiLeaks was exposing some of the secrets of one of the candidates for the election that happened that year. That is what journalists are supposed to do. They are supposed, especially before the election, to expose politicians. That's why journalists have special protection in the First Amendment of the United States. And this was accepted by a judge in court in Manhattan, in New York this summer, where the Democratic Party took WikiLeaks to court in a civil case. The judge threw it out. And on those grounds, the judge said, exposing information of what's going on behind the curtains on one of the political parties prior to election is First Amendment protected activity. And the judge also said it doesn't really matter where that material and those information came from, even if they were obtained through illegal means by someone else, that doesn't take away the right of the journalistic organization to publish prior to the election.
Tell me, you had a long and distinguished career in journalism in Iceland before you became associated with Wikileaks. Would you have balked at having as a journalistic source a hostile foreign powers intelligence agency such as the GRU supplying information to Wikileaks?
Well, Julian Assange has answered this question. The source of this information was not Russian, was not a state actor.
Well, we've got over 17 American intelligence agencies, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, all agree that it was a Russian cutout, Gusev 2.0, that provided the hacked emails to WikiLeaks. Would you even know, given the anonymous submission process that WikiLeaks has for information, would you even know if it was the Russians giving you that stuff?
We prefer not to know the source, and that is for the security of the source. Getting back to those 17 intelligence agencies, including, I think, the Coast Guard Intelligence Agency and the State Department Intelligence Service, there is nothing to say that they can't be wrong altogether. They have been wrong. And also intelligence services, they tend to lie. They have the role to lie. That's what Mike Pompeo actually said in an interview, and you can find that online. He said, I was surprised when I did my stint in the CIA, because in the military I was trained not to lie, to tell the truth, but then I was leading an organization that the sole purpose of the organization was to lie, which is the truth, it's disinformation. So are we going to trust intelligence agency? We've come to a place actually in the US media where leaders of intelligence agency are commentators, are opinionators, I mean, who are presenting opinions of world affairs. What on earth is going on? Where is journalism when we rely on paid liars to present the truth? That's a serious matter. It's a serious matter for everybody.
Well, what do you say to criticisms that one thing about WikiLeaks is they're always seeming to damage the United States. They're not damaging Russia. And when there are these other Russian connections, the work for Russia Today, the multiple allegations of Russia being the source of the 2016 DNC and Podesta emails, that there's something not quite right there, and that maybe at best WikiLeaks or Assange as an individual has become what's referred to as a useful idiot as far as the Russians are concerned, or at least a fellow traveller in wishing to damage Hillary Clinton.
Well, to start with, it's absolutely wrong that we haven't published material on Russia. We've published material on a Russian contractor to the intelligence services, for example, and information pertaining to Russia. If you look up Putin, you will find thousands, if not tens of thousands, of documents.
Nothing that's had quite the same impact, though, as whether it's collateral murder or any of the other big dumps that have seemed to undermine America's foreign policy objectives.
But what is the point?
And Russia seems to be getting a free pass.
Are you telling me that we have withheld information that?
I don't know.
Well, I'm telling you we haven't. But the fact of the matter simply is this: we don't choose material. I mean, it is handed to us.
I'm interested in what effect both 2016 and now Assange's indictment has had on WikiLeaks itself. Like, for instance, is it safe for Americans to join WikiLeaks now that there's an indictment hovering over Assange? Have you found Americans not joining WikiLeaks as a result of this?
There are individuals, and I can't name them, identify them, who are actually living in exile, and I'm not talking about Snowden, who had a minor doing or with WikiLeaks back in the days, who have not been able to return to their homeland, who have actually been put under scrutiny. There have been attempts to get them to testify against Julian Assange in this secret case in front of a grand jury in Virginia, under the sort of Godfather offer. You're offered immunity if you testify against Julian Assange, and then there are ... I mean, you can fill in the blanks. What did Don Corleone said? Make him an offer he can't refuse. These people, American citizens, are living in other countries, and they can't go home.
Early next year, we're going to have a presidential election campaign underway in the United States. There's also already a lot of sensitivity about whether Russia is up to their old tricks. Congress has heard evidence to say, yes, they are. The misinformation campaign is on again. Julian Assange is going to be facing potential ongoing legal peril next year. In light of all of that, Wikileaks gets an anonymous dump of emails or some information highly damaging to one candidate or another, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or somebody else on the other side. How do you prevent this happening again, or do you simply just say, hey, we're journalists, if it's worth printing, we'll put it up online and let the cards fall where they may?
Well, if you get newsworthy information that should be out in the public, especially before election, you have a duty to publish it. If you don't, if you start being selective, you're biased. And that's the worst crime. It's the worst crime of journalists. You're betraying the principle of journalism, aren't you?
Of course, it's not just WikiLeaks trying to do this. Journalism's changed in the last 10 years or so. The New York Times is trying to do exactly the same thing WikiLeaks does. They've got a little secure Dropbox as well, so is Washington Post. The Intercept is a site that's kind of like halfway between WikiLeaks and a regular newspaper. Do you feel like journalism is winning this war or losing this war?
The journalism is under a very serious attack. And if there is not a change in the attitude of journalists and they team together and get support to fight back, they will lose. And if Julian is extradited to the United States to spend the rest of his life and die in prison in the US, which will happen if he is thrown on a rendition plane over the Atlantic to the US, so much is lost that I would be fearful for journalism, because that will set a precedent saying that no journalist is safe anywhere, especially when he's working on national security issues. If he offends or is perceived to have exposed some interests of that power, he will be chased down. So it's a crackdown. And this is in line with what has been, we've been seeing it going from bad to worse in this 2 decades since the turn of the century after 9/11. If we lose that fight, we have lost so much that I would really be afraid that we'll never regain it again.
Final question for you as Editor-in-Chief, trying to sort of unpack this relationship between what is WikiLeaks and what is Julian Assange and his legal situation, and the fact that it must be incredibly difficult to make publishing decisions knowing that if you upset the United States or Britain now, a man may die, or at least may spend the rest of his life in jail. How do you, I mean, those are stakes that most media proprietors, most editors-in-chief never deal with.
It's true. But it hasn't come on my desk yet to have to make such a difficult decision. Let's see what happens.
Christian Hudson, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And we did have a long and interesting chat with Christian. You can see the whole unedited thing on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook. But for now, that is it for another week on what was our penultimate show for 2019.
Indeedy, and if you look here, you'll find our Planet Extra with Dr. David Smith again this week. We're talking about NATO tariffs, impeachment, so much more. See you there.
Bye-bye.